Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to build a very cool voice assistant app with React Native. We'll be using ChatGPT, DALL-E and some other third-party libraries in this application. You will learn how you can modernize your application with the help of AI. Also, you can add it to your portfolio as well. So without further wasting any time, let's check out the application. So this is Jarvis, our AI voice assistant, and this is the welcome page. Next, we have home screen where you can see all the features of our application. I've combined the power of ChatGPT and DALL-E to get the answers of any question or to create any image that you have in mind. Once you press this recording button, you can ask any question to this voice assistant. So let's try this out. What is React Native?
React Native is an open source framework developed by Facebook that allows developers to build mobile applications using JavaScript and the React library.
Compare it with React.js.
React.js, commonly referred to as just React, is a JavaScript library developed by Facebook for building user interfaces. It focuses on building reusable UI components that efficiently update and render only the necessary parts of the user interface.
Okay, so one thing that you may have noticed is that it remembers the context that we are talking about. Like when I said compare it with React.js, it remembered that we were talking about React Native previously, so that it compared React Native with React.js. And that is a very cool thing about this voice assistant. So now let's try to create an image. Create a realistic image of a dog as an astronaut. Okay, now we have a very cool picture of a dog as an astronaut. Now let's try to create another one. Create a hand-drawn sketch of Ferrari. And we have a very cool picture of Ferrari. You can also go back and see all the previous messages, all of the responses from ChatGPT and all of the images. We also have a button at the bottom that will clear all the message history, and then you will see all the features of the app. Now I hope you got the better idea of what we'll be building in this project. Okay, so we'll be using React Native to build this application. We're going to use React Native CLI, then we're going to use Native Wind. This is a package built on top of TailwindCSS to design React Native components. We'll be using that. We're going to use React Native navigation to navigate between different screens. Then we're going to use another package called React Native Responsive Screen. We'll use this to make our application responsive for all the devices like layouts and font styles. Then we're going to use Axios to make requests to our OpenAI API. Then we're going to use React Native Community slash voice package. This is a package to convert your voice into text, and then we can use that text to generate the response from ChatGPT. This is a very handful package. Then we're going to use React Native TTS. This is a package to convert your text into speech. We're going to use it when we get the response from ChatGPT so that we can convert that text into speech. And to make all of this happen, we're going to use OpenAI, we're going to use ChatGPT and DALL-E services to create our AI voice assistant. Don't worry if all of this seems a bit confusing because I'll be explaining all of these step by step. So first we need to create an application. So let's go to this website and hit get started. We're going to use React Native CLI to create this application. I'm using Mac, so I'll be choosing Mac OS. Then you need to install Node and Watchman, and after that you need to install Xcode from App Store to use the iOS simulator. Then after that you need to run this command into your terminal because this will remove all the React Native CLI packages if you already have installed. So open the terminal and run this command. Then to create the project we're going to use this command npx react native init. Just copy this command and paste it into the terminal, and let's change the project name to React Native AI. Now this is gonna take a few minutes to load all the project files and all the libraries. It basically depends on your internet speed. I have very slow internet unfortunately, so I had to wait a lot. Just wait for this to finish. Once that's finished, you can close the terminal and open your project into VS Code. Let me just open that and drag that here. Now let's make it full screen. Okay, so this is our project. So first let's try to run this application, and you can do that by using npm run iOS command. This is going to build our application and open the iOS simulator. Let's just make this full screen and adjust it here. Okay, so our application is running, and as you can see, we have a welcome screen. Let's just close this. Now we're also gonna need our Metro builder here to reload our application or to see all the logs. So you can reload application using R. Okay, so this is our app.tsx file that we will change in a second because we're going to use JS in this project. But first of all, I need to store all the assets for this project. So let's create a folder, assets, and then we're going to have an images folder. Let me just drag all the images here like this. And these are all the images that we're going to use throughout the development. You can find all of these into my GitHub repo. So let's close this. And now we're going to create some folders to structure our files. Let's create a source folder. Now let's create a screens folder to hold all our screens. We also need a components folder to hold all our components. These can be reusable. Let's create a constants folder to hold all the constants or all the dummy data. Then we need a navigation folder. And lastly, we're gonna need an API folder to hold all our API calls. Okay, our folder structure is done. Now let's move to app.tsx, and as you can see, all of this code is in TypeScript, and we're going to change this to JavaScript. So let's just change the file name first. This should be app.js, and we're gonna remove all of this code and create a simple functional component. So let's use this command rnf. This will create a basic functional component. When I save this, you won't see anything because it's hidden in our notch area. And to fix this, we're going to use safe area view. This will push it a little down so that it won't conflict with the notch area. Now we need a way to design our application, and for that we're going to use Tailwind CSS. And to use Tailwind CSS, we're going to install native wind into our application. So just go to native wind website and click on React Native CLI tab. First we're gonna install native wind. So just copy this and open the terminal and type npm install native wind. Then we also gonna install Tailwind CSS. So just copy this one, and once that's finished, just copy this here, npm install Tailwind CSS. Now we can start the configuration process, and for that we're going to use this command. Just copy this command and run it into your terminal, and this will create a Tailwind CSS configuration file just like this. And now we need to change the contents of this file. Just copy these contents from their website and paste them here. This content array is basically array of all the files that can use Tailwind classes. So in our case, we'll be providing all the files in screens folder, and then we have a components folder. But in your case, if your folder structure is different, you can add your folder here so that you can use Tailwind classes without any issue. Okay, now we need to add this plugin into our Babel configuration file. So just open the babel config.js file and just add that here. Okay, so that's it. Our configuration is done. Now we need to restart our application, and I don't mean to reload by this Metro builder. You need to restart your application by using npm run ios command. This will rebuild your application, and after that you can use your Tailwind classes. So let's give it a background of red 200. Okay, so the background is red. That means our implementation is working and we have successfully implemented native wind. Now let's create a component file for our home screen and welcome screen. Just go to screens folder and create a file home screen, and another file will be welcome screen. So next we're going to add navigation into our project so that we can navigate between different screens, and we're going to add that here. And we're going to use React Native navigation for that. So let's go to their website. Just click on read docs. And first of all, we're gonna install these libraries, navigation slash native. Just copy this and paste it into your terminal. Then because we're not using expo, we won't need this. We're going to use these packages. So let's just wait for them to finish. Just copy them here. Okay, so next we're going to use this command to link all these libraries with React Native. Either you can use this command or there's another command that you can use just cd into iOS folder and run pod install. This is going to link all these libraries with React Native. Okay, so next let's see what else we need to do. Just go to next. We also need to install this native stack as well. So you need to install this using your terminal. Okay, so next they have this sample code with home screen component and navigation implemented. So let's just copy this whole component and let's create a navigation file inside this folder. And let's copy this here, and first of all we're gonna change the function name to app navigation. And we're also going to remove this home screen component because we already have a home screen. So let's just import that home screen here from our screens folder. And let's also import our welcome screen. So let's just copy this and change this to welcome screen. Okay, so home screen is already added. So let's just copy this and change this to welcome screen. And let's also change the component for the welcome screen as well. Now let's create functional components inside these screens file. So let's create a functional component for home screen and one for the welcome screen. Now we can add our navigation file into our app.js component. So we won't be needing this code. We will remove this in a second. First, let's import our navigation file that we just created from our source/navigation. And now we can remove this and add our navigation component. Okay, so you can see home screen, that means our navigation is working. So let's move to app navigation, and first of all we're gonna add a initial route name. So initially we will see welcome screen, then we're gonna add some options here to hide this header. So let's add screen options, and we're gonna set a property of header shown to false. This is going to hide the headers from all the screens just like this. Now our configuration is done. Now let's start designing our application. So let's just restart our application and move to welcome screen. Let's start designing. First of all, let's create a safe area view so that our content is a little below the notch area. Add a class name for flex1. It should be flex justify around and background white. Okay, now we're gonna need another view to create a title for our application. So let's create another view and give it a class name of spacing vertical 2. Then let's create a text with a class name of text center. Fonts should be bold and font color should be text gray of 700. And this will say Jarvis, as this is the name of our application. Let's also make our text bigger using text 4XL class. Now we're gonna create another text view for our punchline, and that will be the future is here, powered by AI. Let's give it a class name of text center. Text center tracking should be wider. Text should be gray 700 and font should be semi bold. Okay, now looking good. Let's just change this color to 600. Okay, great. Now we're gonna create another view for our AI assistant. So let's give it a class name of flex row and justify center. Now let's add our image component, and the source will be an image from our assets that I've already stored, and the image name I believe is called welcome.png, and let's give it a height and width of 72 for now, but we'll be changing that later because we need to make it responsive. Okay, now we can see the bot image. Next we're going to add a button to get start. Let's add a touchable opacity with the class name of background of emerald 600 and margin horizontal of 5. padding of 4 and rounded to XL. Okay, now let's add a text view that will say get started, and let's add a class name to this text view, and this will have a class name of text center. Font should be bold and text will be white. And to make our text bigger, let's add a class of text to XL. Now you will notice that this design is not responsive because we are using fixed height and width. So we will need a way to design this layout using the height and width percentages of the current device. And for that we are going to use another package that is called React Native Responsive Screen. Just copy this command from here and open your terminal and paste it here. Now we're gonna need to import this into our welcome screen. So let's just copy this line from here. Let's close the terminal and paste it here. Now we can use these functions to create a layout with the height and width of the current device, and that will be in percentages. Like if I give a height of 50%, that will mean the 50% height of the current device. And similarly you can use this to add font sizes. So let's add a font size to the title, and that will be the 10% of the width, like this. And now we don't need this text for XL class. Now this text should look same on all the devices. So let's just copy this style and add it to our punchline as well. And let's change that value to 4. Let's also remove the class name from image component because we are no longer using the fixed height and width. And let's give it a width of 75% of the total width. And height will also be the width percentage of 75 because this is a squared image, so we need to make sure the aspect ratio stays the same as well. Now let's add the font size to this text view as well, and let's give it a value of 6. Our home screen is finished. The only thing left to do is redirect to home screen using this button, and for that we're going to use our navigation hook. So let's use the use navigation hook, and we're going to use the on press method on this button, and we can use navigate method with the route name of home. Now when we click on this button, this will take us to home screen. Okay, it's working. Now let's go to home screen and start designing. Let's hide these, and first let's copy height and width functions from welcome screen to this screen because we're going to need them here. Okay, so let's give it a class name of flex1 and background of white. Then we're gonna remove this text and add a safe area view. Let's give it a class name of flex1 as well. Then flex, which is by default in column direction, and margin horizontal of 5. Then we're gonna add the bot icon, which will be our assistant icon. So let's add a view and give it a class name of flex row and justify center. Then we're going to add the image component, and we already have an image for that, and the name for this image is called bot.png, I believe. Let's add that here. Let's give it a style with the height and width of HP 15, so that this image will have the height and width of the 15% of total height. Okay, so now let's save it, and you can see the bot image. Now let's add another view for our features or our text message history. So these will be features or messages based on a condition. So let's create a state for our messages and set messages, and we're going to use the use state hook. That will be by default an empty array. So we're going to use a condition here. So when there are messages, we're going to show the message history. Otherwise, we'll be showing all the features of the application. So let's add a view for now, and let's create a features component, which we haven't created yet. So let's just add this for now here, and let's create a file for our component here, features. Let's create a functional component, and we need to import it here. Now let's copy our width and height functions and move to feature screen to design it. First let's add a style property to this view and give it a height of 60%. of total height, and let's add a class name to give it a vertical spacing of 4. Okay, now for this text, let's style it to have a font size of WP 6.5 like this, and let's also give it a class name of font semi bold and text gray of 700. Okay, now let's add another view for our feature box, and let's give it a background color of emerald 200, padding of 4, rounded XL, and spacing vertical of 2. Okay, then we're going to add another view for our image and the title for this feature. So let's give it a class name of flex row, items shunter, and spacing horizontal of 1. Now first we're gonna add the image, which will be the icon for this feature, and that will be the ChatGPT icon, which I've already stored into my assets, and the name for this is ChatGPT icon.png. Now let's give it a style and give it a height and width of HP4 like this. And when I save this, you can see the icon on the screen. Now let's add a text view for the title, and the title will be ChatGPT. So let's add a text view with a style and font size of WP 4.8 and class name font semi bold and text gray of 700. And the title is going to be ChatGPT. Next, we're going to add another text view for a little description, and we're going to style it with the font size of WP 3.8 and a class name of text gray 700 and a fonts of medium. And let me just copy and paste the description for ChatGPT. Okay, now we have a feature box, so let's just copy this 2 more times for other features like this. And now we can change the titles. This will be DALL-E, and let's change the description for DALL-E. Okay, now we need to change the third one with the smart AI. This will be the combination of ChatGPT and DALL-E. Now let's change the icons for all of these features. We already have ChatGPT, so let's change the DALL-E icon. And for this one, we have smart AI icon. Okay, so we have changed all the icons. Now we need to change the background colors so they look all different. This will be purple, and the last one will be cyan. Okay, so our features component is finished. Now let's get back to home screen and start designing our messages history. But we don't have all the messages for now, so let's create a constants file and use the dummy data for now. Let me just copy and paste the dummy messages here. We are going to structure our messages like this, where we'll have a role and a content for each message. We'll have 2 types of messages, one from user and other from assistant, and assistant can respond in text message or an image URL, and we have to show the messages accordingly. So let's get back and use these messages for now. Let me just import them messages, and by default we'll set these dummy messages into messages array. So the features are gone. That's because we have value in messages array. So let's design this messages container. Let's give it a spacing vertical of 2 and flex 1. Next, we're going to have a text view for an assistant. Let's give it a class name of text gray 700 and font semi bold and margin left of 1. And this will say assistant. Let's also give it a style with the font size of WP5. Okay, looking good. Now let's add another view for all the text messages. So let's give it a style with the height of HP58 Let's give it a class name of background neutral 200. And let's give it a border radius of 3xl and padding of 4. Now let's add a scroll view inside it so that user can scroll through all the messages. I'm going to set the property bounces to false so that when we reach the end of the scroll view it doesn't bounce. And let's give it a class name of spacing vertical 4, and let's show the vertical indicators to false. Now here we're going to loop through all of the messages and show them one by one. So I'm going to use the map method on messages, and we will have a message and an index. Let's add a simple view for now to see if we are getting all the messages. So let's return a view and let's add a text inside that will have the value of message.content. So we're seeing all the messages, but they're not looking good. We have to format them so they look like a conversation. So let's just comment this view for now. Let's just comment this whole return statement. And first we will check if the message is from assistant. That will have a role of assistant. And inside this if statement, we're going to have another check to see if the message is a text message or an image URL. So let's see if the message includes HTTPS. That means it's an image URL. So we have to show them accordingly. So if it includes this, that means it's an AI image. So let's just add and comment for now. Otherwise, it's going to be a text response. And if the role is not assistant, that means it's the user input. So in the else part, let's just comment user input. Now we don't need this, so let's remove this and start designing our user input. So let's return a view with a key of index and a class name of flex row and justify end, because we're going to show this from right end because it's a user input. So let's add another view and give it a style with the total width of 70%. And let's add a class name with background white and rounded XL. Okay, so inside this we're going to add a text view with the message. Let's add a text view and this will say message.content. When I save this, you will see all the user inputs. So now let's give it a padding of 2. Let's also remove the border radius from top right to make it look like it came from the user end, like this. Now you can see all the user messages, and we are only seeing the user messages because only the else part is being executed. So let's just copy this message and paste it into the assistant response. Let's format this, and first of all we're going to remove the outer view to make it look like it came from the left end. Let's reformat it, and let's give it a different background color of emerald 100. And we need to remove the border radius from top left, so let's change this class. Let's add a key as an index. Now let's start designing our image view. So let's add a view with a key as an index and give it a class name of flex row and justify start. Let's add another view with the padding of 2, the class of flex and round it 2xl, background of emerald 100, and let's remove the border radius from top left. Okay, so inside this view we're going to add the image component, and the image will have a source with a URI, and we'll set the URI to message.content. That will be the URL of the image. Let's also make the edges rounded with the class name of rounded to XL, and with the resize mode as contain. And lastly we're going to style it with the height and width of WP 60. Now when I save this, you will see the image from our dummy messages. Um, Everything looks all right. We need to return this view as well. That's why it's not showing. Let's format this. So now you can see the image as well. So this is how the message history is going to look like. When we have the messages value, we're going to show the messages. Otherwise, if we have an empty array, we're going to show only the features. So let's just add dummy messages for now. So at the bottom, we're going to have three buttons, and we're going to have a button for recording and one for clearing all the message history and another one to stop the speech. Okay, let's add a view. Let's give it a class name of flex, justify center, and item center. Now we're going to have a button inside this view, so let's add a touchable opacity. Now let's add an image inside this because we're going to show an icon of the recording button. So let's give it a class name of rounded full, and let's add a source for the image, require assets images and the recording icon.png. Now let's give it a style with a height and width of 10% of the total height. So HP will be 10 and height will be HP 10. Okay, so when I save this, you will see the recording button. So when you press it, you will start the recording. And to start the recording, we're going to show an animated recording button. And for that, we're going to have a state for recording. So let's add a state, recording, and set recording. And by default, this will be false. So using that state, we're going to show two different buttons. So when recording is true, we're going to show the animated image. Otherwise, we're going to show this button. So let's just copy and paste this button for now. And this button here, let me just format it. And when the recording is true, we're going to show a GIF icon. So I've already stored it into my assets. So let me just change the name to voice loading.gif like this. So when the recording is true, we're going to show this animated image. So let me just make it true to show you. This is the icon that we will show when we are recording the user input. Otherwise, we're going to show the green icon for recording. Now I'm going to add another button for clearing all the message history. This button will only show if the message array has a value greater than 0. That means if the message array length is greater than 0, only then we're going to show this button. So let's add a touchable opacity with a class name of PG neutral 400, rounded 3XL, and padding of 2, and I'm going to make it absolute with the right value of 2. Let's add a text view with the text white class and font semi-bold, and this will say clear. Now you can see the clear button. Now let's increase the right value to 10 to move it close to the recording button. And now let's add an onPress method on this button to clear all the message history. And we will have a clear function on this one. And let's create this clear function. This will basically clear all the messages and set the messages to an empty array so that we will see all the features again. Now when I press this button, you will see all the messages will be gone and we will see the features again. So let me just reload the application. Now we're going to have another state for speaking. This will control the text to speech. So we'll have a speaking state, set speaking, and by default this will be false. Let's just copy and paste this button. And we're going to show it on the left side. So let's make the left value to 10. Also let's change this to stop. And let's give it a background of red 400. Now when you press on this, this should stop the speaking. So let's create a stop speaking method. So let's create this function, and for now this will just toggle the state, but later when we add the text to speech library, you'll have more in this function. So this will just toggle the state for now. Let's also change the condition for this button. So when speaking is true, only then we're going to show this button. Otherwise this will be gone. So by default this is false, so let's make it true to show this button, and when we press on this button this will be gone like this. Okay, so our design is complete. Now we can add our text to speech functionality so that when user clicks on this button, we will record his voice and later we will convert it to text. And for that, we are going to use a package called React Native Community slash voice. So let's just copy this command and open our terminal. First, we're going to install this library. Okay, now it's being installed. Now we need to run pod install command to link this library with React Native. But before that, let me just make changes to our info list file to have the mic permissions. So these are the mic permissions code. So let's just copy this code. Without these permissions, we won't be able to use microphone of the phone. So let's just go to iOS folder, and inside this folder go React Native AI, and here's the info list file, and let's just copy and paste them at the bottom of this file here. Okay, now we'll have the microphone permissions. So let's cd into iOS and run pod install command, and this will link the library with React Native. And once that's finished, we can rebuild our project so that we can use this library. Just run npm run iOS. This will rebuild our project. Okay, so now let's see how we can use this library. Let's see if they have a sample code for that. Okay, we have ran this command, and first let's import this library. Let's copy and paste here, and these are the voice handler events that we will need to use. So let's just copy them and create a use effect hook. We will add them inside here so that when component mounts, we will register these events. So let's just add them here and format them. Okay, so these are the voice handler events, and these are in class format. So let's just change them to normal functions. This will be speech start handler. We'll create these handlers later. Let's just define them all one by one. Speech end handler, and the last one is going to be speech results handler. There is one more handler that's called on speech error handler. We need to define it as well so that when we face any error, we need to show them into the console. So let's add speech error handler. So this will register all the events, but we need to destroy the voice instance and remove all these event listeners when we don't need them. So let's return a callback. First, let's destroy the instance and then remove all the event listeners. Then we need to pause voice dot remove all listeners. Now we need to define all of these listeners. So let's create methods for all of these. First, let's create speech start handler, and we'll just console log a message that speech started. Let's say speech start handler. And let's just copy this one more time for the end handler. So let's rename it to speech end handler. And we're also going to change the state of recording in here. So when speech has ended, we're going to set the recording to false like this, and this will say speech end handler. And let's copy this one more time for the results handler, and let's change the name. Let's also remove this because we don't need this here, and here we're gonna receive a voice event. So let's just console log the voice event here. We'll check this later. Okay, so we got one more handler, speech error handler. Let's also console log the event here, just in case if we get any error. We'll just log the event here. Okay, so all the events are registered. Now when we click on this button, it should start the recording, and for that we're going to create another function, start recording, and let's make this function async. First of all, let's set the recording to true so that we can show the animated image. And then we're gonna use the try and catch block to start voice recognition, and you can do that using the voice start method, and you need to pause the language here. I tried using US English, but it wasn't working for me properly, so I end up using this, but you can test this out. Now let's add the catch block to see if we get any error. In case we get any error, we'll just console log the error like this. Okay, so let's close this. Now we need to have another function to stop the recording. So let's just copy this one and change the name to stop recording. And we're gonna remove this set recording to true, and this method will be stop. And we don't need to pass the language here. Let's remove this comment as well. And after that, we're gonna set the recording to false. This will toggle the recording buttons. And after that, we're gonna fetch the results from ChatGPT, but we'll do that later. So let's just add a comment for now. Now let's add these functions to our buttons. And where are our buttons? So here's the recording button. I think we need to add the comments for these so they are easier to find. So let's just add a comment for recording start button. And this is a voice loading GIF. Let's add a comment for recording stop button. Okay, so now we can add onPress method on these to stop and start the recording. Here we will add start recording function, and similarly here we will add stop recording function. Okay, so now what's gonna happen is when we click on this button, first of all it's gonna set the recording to true, and then it's gonna start the voice recognition. And then when we speak anything, it's gonna trigger the speech results handler, and then we will see in the console if we get any results, and we'll see that in the Metro Builder. So let's test this out. Test 1 2 3. Okay, so all of the events are working, and as you can see, we are converting the voice into text and we're getting the value in the console. So now we need to store this value into a state. So let's create a state for results and set result. By default, this will be an empty string. And we can set the results using this handler. So first we need to get the text that we converted, and we can do that using the e.value at 0, because this is an object and we have a value inside the array. So we need to set this text into results, set results text. Okay, this should set the results. Now we need to console log the result to see if we are setting the result like this. Now we need to test this one more time to see if it's all working. How's the weather today? Okay, so it's all working and we're setting the text into results. Now we can use this result to fetch the data from ChatGPT. So let's comment this and let's move to our OpenAI website. This is the website, and first you need to log in using your email, and after you log in you will see this page. Just click on API and this will take you to a page. It looks like kind of a dashboard. So just go to view API keys. Here you can create your own secret key. I've already done this, as you can see my secret key, but for most of you all this may be expired, so I will suggest you to create this using your new email so that you don't run into any issues. So this is the API key section. Now let me show you the API reference, and this is the guide for how you can use authentication. But we're gonna use the chat completion API, and we have this API here in chat, create chat completion. We're going to use this API to get the responses for all our questions. Here they have provided the example request, so how we can test this API. This is all the parameters that we can use, and this is the test response that we'll get if we hit this API. So let's move to our application and set up this. First, let's create a variable inside constants file to store our API key. Export const API key, and don't use this API because I'll be deleting this after this video. And let's create a file inside API folder. This will be OpenAI. And let's import the API key here. Now we're going to use Axios to make our API call. So let's import the Axios here. I've already installed this. And now we're going to create Axios client object using Axios start create. And then we're going to pass some headers. So let's see what headers do we need. First we're gonna add content type as application/JSON. Then we're gonna add an authorization header of bearer token. So let's move back and add these headers. Authorization as bearer plus our API key, and then content type of application/JSON. Okay, so now we need to create another method as an API call to make the API call to ChatGPT. Let's create this async method, and we need to pass prompt and messages array. And let's choose a try catch block to make the API call. And if we get any error, we'll just console log the error. Let's also return a promise with a message. Promise.resolve with an object of success false and a message that will come in error.message. Okay. So now we can make the API call using all the parameters. So let's see what parameters do we have. So we're gonna provide the model and the messages array, and inside the message array we have a role and the content for the message, and role can be system or user or assistant. So here you can see we have the user and assistant roles. And first we need to check what API do we need to call, because there are two APIs, one for text messages and one for image response. So this is the one with the text response, and we have this one create image to create the images. This has different API results and different parameters. So we need to check what API do we need to call first. So let's make an API call to ChatGPT for that, and we'll get the results using await keyword on client.post. And here we're gonna pass the URL. So let's see what URL do we have. This is the URL. Just copy this endpoint and create a const chat GPT endpoint, and we'll store it in here. Let's create DALL-E endpoint as well, and let's see what URL we have to create the images. Let's copy this and paste it here. Now we can pass this chat GPT endpoint here, and then we can pass all the parameters. And for parameters we have this model, which is I believe chat GPT 3.5. It's GPT 3.5 turbo. So let's just copy this here, and then we're gonna have a messages array, which will be a message with a content and a role. So role will be user, and let me just copy and paste the content for this message. So here this message will ask ChatGPT, does this prompt wants to create an image or odd or anything similar? Simply answer with yes or no, and we'll pass the prompt to here. If this answers in yes, that means user wants to create an image, and we can use this information to create an API call to DALL-E. So let's make this API call and get the results. First, let's check what kind of response we're going to get. So this is the sample response, and as you can see, this is an object with the choices array. And the first object contains a message that is the response from ChatGPT, and we can use this response as an answer. So let's go back and console log the response to see if we're getting the same response. Data as result.data. Okay, now we need to test this API, and we need to make this API call. So let's move to app.js and create a use effect hook. We'll just use it to test this API call. Let's import our API call method, and we're going to pass a prompt like what is quantum computing. Okay, so let's save this and see if we're getting the data. Okay, so we got the data. Let me just make this console bigger like this. Now we're getting the choices array, and most importantly we're getting the message as an first object, but we still can't see it, so let's just comment this for now and move to API file, and let's console log our choices with the first object as a message to see what message contents do we have. Okay, so let's uncomment this and try this one more time. And this time we got content as no, because this message does not want to create an image. So let's change this message to create an image of a dog playing with cat. And this time we're getting yes, because we want to create an AI image. So we can use this information to create an image or get a text response. So let's just comment this and store this into a variable. Let's create a variable is art, and we need to store the message content in this variable. This will be message.content. And to make the condition, first we need to make it lowercase, and then we will check if it includes yes. That will mean user wants to create an image, and we need to use DALL-E API for that. So let's just console log DALL-E API call. Otherwise, we will just call the ChatGPT. So let's console log ChatGPT API call. Now we can comment this, and we need to make these two methods. So let's first create a ChatGPT API call. This will be an async method, and this will receive a prompt and all the message history array. And let's use try catch blocks. Let's just copy the API call from here, because this will be the same API call, but we need to change the message to messages array that we are passing to this method. These messages are very important, because if you want ChatGPT to remember the chat context and what we talked about previously, then we need to pass all the message history to this. And that's why we're passing all the messages. And these messages will include our latest prompt as well. So let's just get the answer from this API. Let's choose res.data.choices. Let's just copy this response from this API, because this is going to be the same response. And once we get the answer, we need to push this into messages array. And because this is the response from ChatGPT, so this will have a role of assistant, and the content will be the answer. Let's also trim our answer to get rid of extra spaces. Now let's add our catch block to see if we get any error. We will just return an error message. Also, let's just copy this from this method, because this will be the same. Now we need to return the messages array, so let's return a promise dot resolve, and this will have a value of success true and data as the messages array. Okay, so the way it's gonna work is we pass the messages and we call the ChatGPT endpoint API. We will pause all the message history, and then if we get the answer, we're gonna just push the answer with an assistant role. Then we're gonna return the messages. So let's create another method for DALL-E API. DALL-E API call. This will receive a prompt and the messages array as well. So let's just wrap our API with the try catch block, and let's create an API call await client.post with a DALL-E endpoint. Now here we're gonna add all the parameters, and let's see what parameters do we need to have. Create image. And here are all the parameters that we need to have. One is prompt, that will be the question from user, and n is the number of images I believe, and the size is the resolution for the image. So let's just copy these parameters and just paste them here. Okay, so we already have the prompt that we're passing into this function, so let's use that prompt. For the n parameter, we need to pass only one, because we need only one image. And for the size, they have different size of images, but we'll be using 512. But you can see the documentation for different sizes. Here they have three sizes of images. We'll be using 512, so let's specify that. Now let's add a cache block so that if we get any error, we need to return our error message. Let's just copy the error message from here and paste it here. Okay, so if we get the image, we need to get the URL of the image, and that we can get from the response, and response has this data array, and inside the object we get the URL. Let's create a variable to store this URL, and in Axios we get the data using response.data, but we need to call another data property because response includes a data array as well. So we need to call data, and we need to get the URL from first object like this, and we need to console log the URL to see if we are getting the URL of the image. Now we need to push this URL into messages array, so let's just copy that code from here, and we need to change the answer to URL, and we also need to return the messages. So let's copy this line and paste it here like this. Now we can use both of these functions to create the response according to the user input. So if user wants to create an image, let's return DALL-E API call with the prompt and the messages, and if not, we need to return ChatGPT API call with the prompt and messages. And because we don't have messages for now, so let's add empty array if messages are null or undefined. Now we can test this out, and for that we need to go to app.js and uncomment this API call. This will hit the API and we will see the data in the console, and we got the URL of the image. So let's just use this into the browser and see if we're getting a real image. Okay, so we're getting a cartoonish image. That means our implementation is working and we are successfully creating an AI image. Now we don't need this, so let's just comment this, and we don't need to make a change to this file as well. So let's move to home screen and start implementing this API. Here we're gonna call a method to fetch response. Let's create this method, const fetch response. Here we need to check if the result state has a value. That means we have a voice to text value here. We're gonna just trim this value and check if this length is greater than 0, then we can call the API. We also need to update the messages with the user input. So we need to store all the messages into a new array, and then we need to push the user input with the role as a user, and the content will be result.trim. And then we can set this new array to the messages like this. And now we can import our API call method and pass this messages array to make the API call. First we need to pass the result.trim. This will be the prompt from user, and then we need to pass the messages array, and on that method we will get the result, and we console log the results here dot API data like this. Now what's gonna happen is when we click on this button, first we're gonna check the result have a value, then we're gonna push this to messages as a user input, then we're gonna call the API with the prompt and messages array. Let's just change these messages to new messages array because this will include the user input as well. So let's save it. After that, when we make the API call, first it's gonna check from the chat GPT that if the user wants to create an image or not. We will store the answer into this variable is art, and using this variable we need to decide which API to call. If it's not an image request, then this method will be triggered, and this will take all the message history and push it into the parameters, and using the context this will get the answer and push it to the messages array, and then it will return all the messages array. And similarly this will be triggered when it's an image request, and it will get the image URL and then return the messages array. So let's test this out and see if it's all working. What is quantum computing? Okay, so this is a ChatGPT API call, and we got the response, and response includes quantum computing is an area of blah blah blah. That means our implementation is working, and the last message is the user input that we set into the messages before making the API call. So let's update the messages with the assistant response as well. So we will check if the success is true. That means we get the data successfully and set the messages with the new result.data. This will be the updated messages array, and we need to set the results to an empty string. And if we get any error, we need to show that error to users. So in the else part, we're going to use the alert from React Native. Let's use alert method and pass the title as error, and the value will be result.message. Okay, so now we can properly test this out. So first let's clear all the messages, and we need to hide this as well. So let's make this false for now. And now we don't need all these dummy values. So let's just remove dummy messages and create an empty array as a default value. So now let's test it. What is React Native? Okay, so we got our input, and if we see the console, this will be a ChatGPT API call, and we got the response as well, and this is being set in the fetch response method in here. So let's try this one more time. What is React.js? Okay, so we got the response, but we have another issue. It needs to scroll down automatically. So let's create a reference to this scroll view. Const scroll view ref, and we'll use the use ref hook to create the reference, and then we're gonna provide this to our scroll view. Set the ref property to the scroll view reference like this. Now we can use this reference to scroll to the bottom of the scroll view. So let's create a method to update this. Update scroll view after updating the user input, and after setting the messages from the API, we need to call this method. So let's create this method, update scroll view, and we need to update the scroll view and set timeout scroll view, and we need to access the current object, and then we have a method scroll to end, and then we need to pass the property animated true. So this will animate while scrolling down at the bottom. Let's add a 200 milliseconds time for this set timeout. Now let's test this out and see if it's working. What is JavaScript? Okay, we got the response, but it was not long enough to scroll at the bottom. So let's try this one more time. What is TypeScript? Okay, so now it's updating and it's scrolling down at the bottom of the scroll view. Now I'm going to add a loading state into our application so that when we are calling the API and waiting for the results, we need to show the loading icon, and that is going to be here in the recording icon. So for that we need to create a state for loading. So let's create a new state, loading, and set loading. And by default this will be false, and we need to make it true when we call the API. And then we can set it false when we get the results from the API. Now we can use this loading to show the loading icon. So we're going to use that here. So let's see if the loading is true. Then we're going to show the loading icon. Otherwise, we're going to show the recording icons. So let's just copy them from here and paste them here. Let's reformat them. And let's remove these. Now let's add an image component here. Let's give it a source. And we need to provide the loading icon, which I've already stored into images. It's called loading.gif. And for the styles, let's copy them from the recording button. Now when I save this, we should be seeing the loading icon when we are getting the data from the API. So let's test this out. Create a realistic image of kids playing in the street. Okay. What is AngularJS? Okay, so as you can see, our loader is working and we're getting all the images and all the responses from ChatGPT. Let's see if it remembers the context as well. Compare it with React.js. Okay, so we got the response, and let's see if it's comparing it with React.js. And as you can see, it's comparing and it remembers the context and all the previous messages, and that is only possible when we are passing all the old message history as well. As you can see here, we are passing all the old messages, and using these messages, ChatGPT remembers the old context and what we were talking about before. This feature makes our application very special. So now we're gonna convert this text into speech. And for that, we are going to use a package that is called React Native TTS, that stands for text to speech. So let's go to their GitHub homepage, and this is a command to install this package. So just copy this and open the terminal and paste it here. We also need to link this library with React Native, but we'll do that in a second. But first we need to add some event listeners for this library. So let's see where they are. Okay, so here are all the event listeners for this library. Just copy all of them. And this library is installed now. Just cd into iOS folder and run the pod install command. This will link this library with React Native. Make sure you restart your project after running this command. Cd back. And let me just reload the project. Now we can start using this library, and first of all we need to add all of the event handlers in UseEffect hook. So here are all the TTS handlers. This library is very easy to use. You just need one function to start the text to speech functionality. So let me just import this library here. So now we can use this functionality when we get the data from API call. So let's create a function for that. Start text to speech. And we're gonna pause the lost response because that will be the AI assistant response, and we're gonna convert that text response to speech. So let's create this function here, and this will receive the message. And here we're gonna make a check if the message content includes HTTPS. That means it's an image URL. So we're not gonna start text to speech service in that case. Now we're gonna start text to speech servers, and for that we can use this speak method, and this will take our text string and convert it into voice. So let's change hello world to our message content. You can also change the pitch rate and the person voice ID using the library documentation, but I will leave this as it is. So let's try this and see if it's working. What is React Native? Okay, so it got it wrong.
A native of Riyadh refers to someone who was born and raised in the city of Riyadh, which is the capital and largest city of Saudi Arabia.
But now we know that our text to speech is working, so let's try this one more time. What is React Native?
React Native is an open source framework for building mobile applications. It is developed by Facebook and uses JavaScript as its
Now we need to show a stop button using our speaking state. So let's toggle our speaking state here. When we start the text to speech, we need to make it true. And if you remember, we were using this state to show a stop button. So here's the button, and when we click on this, we need to actually stop the speaking. So we can do that by using the stop function on the TTS library like this. And hopefully when we click on the stop, this will stop the speaking. So let's try this again. What is quantum computing?
Quantum computing is a cutting-edge field of technology that utilizes principles of quantum mechanics to perform computations. Unlike classical computers that use bits to represent information.
Okay, so our stop button is working. Now we also need to stop the speaking when we click on the recording button. So let's do that. And we can use the stop function in this function. So let's use tts.stop function here. We also need to stop the speaking when we clear all the messages. So here is the clear messages function. So let's stop speaking here. Now it will stop speaking when we hit the recording button. So let's try this again. What is machine learning?
Machine learning is a subfield of artificial intelligence that focuses on developing algorithms and techniques that enable computers to learn from and make predictions or I am.
Okay, so this is not working, and I think we made a mistake. We need to stop the speaking not here when we're fetching the results. We need to move it to start recording function. So let's just copy this from here and we need to add it when we start the recording, like here. So let's try again. Create a realistic image of a dog as an astronaut. What is the distance between moon and the earth?
The average distance from the moon to the earth is about 384,400 kilometers.
Okay, so our application is complete and we have implemented ChatGPT and DALL-E services. So let me just make this window bigger and do a final demo of the app. What is rocket science?
Rocket science is a branch of science and engineering that deals with the design, development, and operation of rockets and spacecraft.
What is React Native?
React Native is an open source framework created by Facebook for developing mobile applications. It allows developers to build native mobile.
Create a realistic image of kids playing with cat. Create a realistic image of a dog riding the bike. Create a realistic image of an astronaut in the desert.
Two plus two equals 4.
Okay, so we need to hide this button when speaking is done, and we can do that in TTS finish event. Here is the event and we can toggle the speaking in this function. We just need to toggle it to false when speaking is done. And now when the speaking is done, this will hide. So let's try it again. Why is it not 5?
2 plus 2 is equal to 4 based on standard arithmetic and the conventional rules of mathematics. The sum of 2 plus 2 is universally recognized as 4 because it follows the principles of addition.
Okay, so false is not a function. Oh yeah, we need to set speaking to false. This was the mistake. Okay, so let's try it one more time and see if it's working. What is 1 plus 3?
1 plus 3 equals 4.
Okay, so with this our application is complete and I will leave the link of the GitHub repo for this project into the video description. If you still have any questions about anything, you can ask them into the comment section and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. I've put so much effort into this project, so if you really like this project, do share it with your React Native friends and do subscribe the channel for more cool projects like this. So this is it for this video. See you in the next one.